This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. Recorded live on Wednesday afternoons on a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 67, October 7th, 2014. Drupal State of Mind.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Is today the 8th?
Today is the 8th.
Okay.
All day and almost every time.
I'll fix that later. I said October 7th. So, welcome everyone.
Hey.
The title of our show is Drupal State of Mind. So, what's everybody's state of mind today? Let's start there. How's everyone doing? We had an hour-long pre-show. We never got to hit record. We had audio problems, had Drupal COD problems, and now we can actually get on to record something for you today. So welcome, Jason.
Hello. It's nice to be back. Feels like it's been a while.
It has been a while.
At least a week.
Well, it's actually been a couple weeks since I've been on. 2 or 3? I don't know.
Yeah, 2 or 3 sounds about right.
So what have you been doing that's exciting? Anything?
Well, having my book ship has been awesome. So I actually have physical copies. Seeing people get those. I actually had somebody tweet their own version of an unboxing, which was pretty awesome. And 2 great events last week. Artifact Conference here in Providence and UX Fest up in Boston. Learned a ton, met lots of great people, and had a really good reception to talks on typography. So it was good.
That's good.
Yeah, and I did a 100-mile bike ride over the weekend.
Glad you're back. So John Picozzi from Oomph, welcome. What is your state of mind?
My state of mind is busy, very busy. Working on a couple cool projects. Look forward to sharing those with you in the future. Organizing nude camp. Dealing with a 2-year-old. Busy, very busy.
Great. Nick, how about you? What is your state of mind?
State of mind? Zen. No, I had a successful site launch last week and got some positive feedback from the client. Yesterday and today, saying that their clients are very happy with it. So that's always a plus. So.
That's good to hear. Nice.
Great news. So our topic today comes from a Drupal PVD meeting we had last night, which is a monthly meetup in Providence. We talk about Drupal, and we had a new attendee named Jerry who came in. And the beginning of the meeting, what do you call that beginning section of our meeting?
That little mentoring mixer.
Okay. So the idea is that anyone can bring some issues to the table, and we try to solve things for people and learn from each other, etc. So Jerry came in, and he's a longtime PHP developer. It appears that he has a large application that he's written in PHP, and he's looking to get some of the benefits of using Drupal. Primarily the templating system is what he was initially talking about, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then permissions for accessing and modifying content.
So he was looking for, I guess he tried on his own to try to integrate with Drupal in some way, I guess. It's not exactly clear to me what approach he took, but he's trying to see if he could use Drupal for some of his system and not other pieces.
Yeah, essentially what it sounded like to me was he wanted to use Drupal as basically a front-end display framework of some sort where his application's database would serve information into the Drupal templating engine, and Drupal would just handle the display portion of things for him.
I think one of the things that he was struggling with, which was sort of conceptually how to figure out what was where. and how things could blend.
Yeah, that's always a challenge when you're integrating third-party applications. I mean, sometimes I think when it's an internally developed application, it's a little bit easier because you can modify the API as needed on your end. But I think one of the more interesting aspects of Drupal 8 is that Drupal 8 is going to make it a lot easier to both become that application server or just kind of be the presentation layer. But it's definitely possible in Drupal 7.
Well, it is, and I think this is what kind of got me thinking about this as our topic for today, because I think we all came from using something else into using Drupal, and we learned lots of lessons along the way. Nobody shows up empty-handed to working in Drupal. You've got baggage. You've got other ways of thinking and doing that you used before, and Jerry obviously has that too, and he has some really successful applications that he's built. And the challenge is coming into Drupal and looking at it through the lens of what Drupal does well and how Drupal does it versus how you think Drupal should do it. And that is often the hardest leap for a developer to make, is to trust in how Drupal does things and work with that and leverage it rather than fight it and subvert it by writing custom code for everything.
And Jerry's not coming from a framework either, so it's another level of a challenge for him. It's like, so if you're developing things with a framework, you're generally accustomed to using an already established API to query data. He's writing SQL query code directly to query data. And to make that shift from accessing the tables in the physical and logical model that you've put him in to now moving to Drupal, where it's so far abstracted from what you would consider a relational model, or it is relational, but in a model that you think of the data in,
right,
as opposed to how it's stored, is a difficult switch. And you can't sit there and write SQL queries unless you're some kind of SQL ninja on steroids. And you shouldn't be doing that anyway. So it's that switch for him, I think, which is one of the sticking points.
Yeah.
Well, Steve, one of the things I kind of want to add on to that, or maybe ask, is, Jerry wasn't using a framework in the convention of like, hey, there are frameworks out there that everybody uses. He kind of developed his own framework. He was talking about how he basically had this library of functions and methods that he used to basically, he knew that he could go into this library and get this thing out and use it where he needed to. So, I think there's a really big shift there from somebody like Jerry that is, basically has their own library that they've kind of cultivated over the years, working directly with the data in the database, and making that switch to Drupal, because as the conversation kind of went towards last night, sometimes those queries can be really complex in Drupal, where based on your information and how it's structured, you could do it a lot easier with your own framework or your own database structure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when you make your own stuff, and this was the position I was in until it was maybe 2006, 2007 when I went to the agency in Providence and started using Drupal. Up until that point, I had been responsible for designing, building, and coding every aspect of every other content management system I'd ever worked on, and I'd been building them for 10 years. So I wrote every SQL query. I wrote every update call, delete call, add call. I mean, every scrap of it. There was never anything to really fall back on. So that also meant I wasn't focused on making an API. I was making discrete functions. When I wanted to add press releases, I designed a press release table, and then I made applications to insert, update, and delete records, and I built that into an admin interface, and that became another link for the admins to use. And so I think that's the mindset, and you have this sort of like you learn things about databases, and you decide, okay, I have a fairly stable data structure, and he was talking about a very large number of fields, and it makes it very easy for him to do queries against that field. Whereas where I had gone in developing a content management system that was more philosophically aligned with how Drupal works, I had created different data tables to store like bits of data, and I stitched them together into what Drupal would call a content type, and then I wrote the queries to go to all those tables and pull that stuff out and put it in the right order so that I had data to put on the screen to show a page. And it was great for content management. It gives you a very flexible model to build out these different kinds of content, but it's terrible from a database efficiency standpoint if that is your mindset, and that's the difficulty we were trying to describe. Is okay, how do I get past that and stop thinking about it like a DBA, a database administrator, and think about it as an application builder, and just focus on the end result, not what's under the hood.
Yeah, and one of his concerns was performance, and it's sort of where the place he's coming from. It's a valid question and a concern when he looks at the statement that we said is, well, every field that turns into a table. And when you say something like that to someone who's not used to that world, it's pretty shocking.
It is, but I think it's really easy for the discussion about performance to get overly hung up on theoretical limits. And when I say theoretical, I mean like, yes, it may be more milliseconds to do that, but from the standpoint of the end user, when you're talking about dozens or maybe even only a couple hundred users ever on this thing with very low volume of traffic, it's not like they're all hitting this thing all day long, all the time. The reality is a decent database is probably going to be, a database server is probably going to be fine.
Right.
And that's not meant to stand up to John's 1,000 concurrent user test that he was talking about.
Right.
Because that's just not the real use case. Even a very busy website very often doesn't have 50 concurrent users on it.
Right.
So, I think we sometimes get hung up on the wrong aspects of performance, just absent, real world anecdotal evidence of how it will really work.
And then the discussion went then to what are the benefits of moving to an environment like Drupal? What does he gain? So yeah, theoretically he might lose performance, and we don't know. It all depends on his application, the usage. But what does he gain on the side of moving in this direction? And the direction was not try to integrate. The direction was you need to go sort of all in. Right, is to pick a portion of, and I think that's what he decided he was going to do: pick a new module of his system or a new section, and try to do it completely in Drupal and see where he would end up.
Well, I think where we got with that was using views. He was going to use views to kind of query his database of information to get that information into pages and blocks, and then kind of use the presentation layer there to achieve what he was ultimately trying to achieve. But that actually morphed into an interesting conversation about the REST API, which he was not aware existed in Drupal 7 and is going to be much more prevalent in Drupal 8. So I think that was, as far as going to a meetup and getting something out of it, I think that was valuable for him to be able to know that existed and that he could work with that.
And for somebody that has built the system themselves, I mean, there are a couple of ways to build views to integrate with a different database. One is you can build, you can just tell views to use it, but there's also ways to do that authenticated. I mean, if it's not on the same machine, then there are performance hits, but for somebody who's already comfortable with building their own system, it's my understanding that connecting views is a fairly straightforward process, and then you have all that UI at your disposal.
Has anyone ever done that? Connected a view to a different database?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been a while, but it wasn't that hard, and it worked pretty well. I didn't do a lot of data manipulation. It was really just displaying stuff.
Jason, just to clarify, that's a different, just a different database than the Drupal database, right? It's not a different database type.
Well, technically, it doesn't. It doesn't really matter as long as the database connector exists on that server. So it could be an. I mean, probably showing my age a little bit. I mean, it could be an ODBC data source. It could be any other kind of data source that you can define in PHP. In your settings file, it would go in your settings PHP file. You can define more than one data source. And so it's just named, and then with that module, you can say, I would like to query something from this database, not that one, and pick these tables. And it's kind of eerie the way we were able to basically just see all these other tables of information. The challenge is if you don't really know that schema. I mean, obviously Jerry does. It's his. I mean, he wrote it all. But if you don't know the schema, actually you have to build all the relationships yourself to get things out of multiple tables into a meaningful result set.
So this is an area where we didn't give Jerry enough information last night, because this could be also another first pass for him at doing this, because it addresses the areas that he was most concerned about, which was using the templating system and displaying the content of the website. I mean, that's what he was most concerned about.
Well, actually, I was talking with him about using that particular module very early on, and he'd said that he tried it, and it was the multiple tables and everything. I think that was like doing anything complex with it. Display was one thing, manipulation of data was another.
Which module are you talking about when you say?
What's the one that views tables or something like that?
That one.
I don't remember the name of it, but it's the one that allows you to look at another data source, and I think it was called Views Table. I thought.
I would find it hard to believe that works properly with relational tables in another data model.
Well, it has to be. I believe it has to be a database schema that's supported by Drupal. So like MariaDB, MySQL, there's a couple other that it supports. So I think it'll actually be a bigger issue, and it's interesting because it will be both a bigger.
MySQL, so I don't think that's the problem.
Okay. Yeah. So as long as it's something that's supported by Drupal, you really just give the credentials, and then you have to give it. Then you have to tell Drupal about the structure, and then as soon as it has that, views can pull information from it.
Fascinating. I'd like to learn more about that. Actually, it's interesting.
So.
There's a few different modules out there. I'm gonna have to dig them up, and we can put them in the show notes. Because there were a couple that worked, but I think some were Drupal 6 and some were Drupal 7. Drupal 6, there's the Table Wizard module, but there's a different way to handle it in Drupal 7 that does allow you to do much the same thing.
There's a views data source. I wonder if that's the one you're thinking of.
No, I don't think so. It might be views XML backend.
Yeah. Okay.
That requires. I don't know if that requires only XML, but views data source lets you kind of serve as the endpoint.
I think our general recommendation from him was to try to avoid an integration and actually try to understand Drupal better, and then determine if Drupal could do everything he needed it to do. Right?
Well, the other thing that was a possibility was simply going with using Drupal to manage content in other areas of the website, and simply have his own system displaying the stuff that he already has written, in other areas. I mean, it depends on what it is exactly that he really needs to do. But I think we were talking about all of the benefits that you get from working within the API and using the views infrastructure and all the caching and all those sorts of things that you sort of subvert or go around or lose if you just start doing lots of custom code. So using the REST API modules in 7 or 8 to be able to bring stuff in and push it back out is a way to have that external data source and work with it that way. But he'd have to build his own endpoint. And so, I mean, that's a whole other challenge right there. And again, focusing on making your stuff interoperate with something else, he's got to bolt that on to all the other stuff that he's already built. So that's not trivial either.
So coming away from Jerry a little bit, because I think this is a problem that all of us have seen in one form or another. When you have a developer from outside of Drupal trying to either get into Drupal or trying to use Drupal in a way similar to this, what's the best way to get them to do it the Drupal way? We're talking about Drupal state of mind here. I would say first and foremost, obviously, that is like they need to have a willingness to use Drupal and want to use it in the right way. But besides that, where do they go from there? What's the next step for them?
Well, I think what we had, and coming back to Jerry a little bit, what I had suggested to him was sit down with one of us or come back to the meetup. Maybe we should have him on the show. Go through what you want a system to do with someone who is familiar with Drupal, and they could give you the way you might do that in Drupal by building out content types, entity relationships, field collections, all these things that are sort of normal to us. And regardless of who the developer is, John, you just have to give them a way to look at how the content would be structured and how you would go about doing these things to get the end result that you are after. Never mind how you think you should get there, but just what's the why behind what you're trying to do.
It was a struggle initially in our company when we decided to use Drupal, and because we come from exactly the same place Jerry is. We've written our own CMS, we have our own framework. And to get people to do things the Drupal way was difficult. So one of the things we did was say you can't write any code. Not allowed to. No code until we really understand all the modules that are out there and things we can take advantage of. And I think that was a big help. I don't think we wrote any custom code for a year.
Yeah, I come from the other end of the spectrum. I come from not having very, super strong PHP skills, not having written my own CMS. So when I first started with Drupal, it was magic to me. And I was always looking for a solution first in configuration. So I think that now that I'm starting to dabble in coding and writing modules, I'm starting to see the allure of always just writing it yourself. But I think what you just said is important. When you're starting to adopt Drupal, one of the important things is not to just run roughshod over it. Don't rewrite the templating engine just because you feel like the way it's doing it doesn't make sense. And while sometimes bits and pieces of Drupal don't make sense in the wider world, to continue using the the community. One of the big advantages of using Drupal is it's supported by such a wide community. And if you come in and just completely break the functionality of Drupal to get something to work, you just won't be able to pull in the knowledge of other people, whether that's security patches, updates, or even just, hey, my site is acting really funky on this page. And somebody could, somebody that's got Drupal experience could generally just say, oh, well, that's because these two modules interact this way. But if you've rewritten, the Drupal core module, then, there's a very, very small percentage of people that would be able to look at that and be like, oh, this is why that's happening. So, I mean, I think that edict of not being able to write custom code for a certain period of time is probably a good one. because you want to be using the hooks that Drupal provides, and where the hooks don't work, you want to be writing your own hooks. So
I think that was one of the points that Steve made last night. Is if you are working entirely with your own stuff, there's exactly one person that you can call who understands all of that code. But if you're working within Drupal, right away there were four other people around the table that could pick that stuff up and provide input and potentially help work on it. And the more people you know in the Drupal community, the more possible that is, because we have a shared experience and understanding of all of that stuff.
I think it also comes back to, Steve. What Steve said was, at his company, they were very focused on using modules and not writing custom code. I think that's a good approach, but I also think, again, comes to a mindset of not saying, oh, well, I can do this with like 6 lines of code that I can just write myself, and actually diving in and finding out what the actual Drupal way of doing it is, before you're just, you're either coding a custom module or just adding in, random bits of code in places that may not be overly Drupal friendly. I mean, I think that goes along with the state of mind too, that you definitely have to make a concerted effort to make the shift.
Let's move on to our module of the week. We're going to wrap this one up a little bit quicker than usual. We have a couple of hard stops here coming in a few minutes. So, what is our module of the week? I've forgotten what it is.
Bundle copy.
Oh, yeah, bundle copy. Like, it's one of those modules that you have to have, I think, right?
But you never remember what it is or why
But you never remember what it's called.
yeah, I've had that issue a couple of times, but it's a lifesaver. So, who wants to talk about it? I think we've all used it.
I have no idea what it does, so I would not be a good person for that.
I've only used it for one thing, which was to move a content type from one site to another, and I know that only scratches the surface. So why don't you guys actually give it a better explanation?
Well, that's all it really is it allows you to export content types. I think with so you can copy, if you have a bunch of fields on a second content type that are the same as another one, instead of having to manually recreate it, you can just copy them over. And that's the only way I've ever used it.
Well, it's not actually just cloning content types. It's also things like field collections and commerce entity bundles.
And taxonomies, I believe.
So, I mean, like, those things can be really hugely helpful to be able to take a whole taxonomy and terms rather than just the structure of the taxonomy itself.
How does that boil down to, when you're copying it from one site to another? How does it handle things that are kind of like specific to that content type, like entity references and values in the database that are not transportable from one site to another?
I'm not sure.
I missed that a little bit. Sorry.
Ask your question again, John.
So I guess my question is, like, within the Drupal database, there could be, or there are things that aren't overly transportable between two sites. How does it handle that? I mean, I guess if you guys are using it to move content types from one site to another, it must work pretty well in being able to transport those content types from one site to another without much issue. I mean, are there scenarios where you wouldn't use bundle copy, I guess, is the root of my question.
Well, I mean, I think, it's like with features or whatever. As long as you have the modules there, then, as long as the same modules are there for the same kind of field types and stuff, then it's it's not that big a deal. It's like a feature. I mean, as long as if you can export that, then you can bring it in.
So essentially, you just have to make sure that everything is the same on on each site.
Yeah, like if you don't have like the telephone field module turned on, and and you're trying to bring that over, it's not going to work.
Now, does it integrate with features? Like, so if you wanted to copy a whole taxonomy tree from one site to another, can you do that with features in bundle copy or no?
That's a good question.
Not sure.
I'll probably be testing that tomorrow.
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing of note, nice big note there at the top, bundle copy for Drupal 8, core configuration management.
That's interesting because it sounds like it's more for basic content types than like an overly advanced content type. Like if you had a content type with like, I don't know, 25 entities on it of some sort or another, you may not want to use that just because you may end up doing a lot of like, oh, is this module enabled? No, it's not. I have to enable it. Oh, is this module enabled?
Yeah, but I think a lot of times it's using features lets you bring a whole bunch of things. This is just from the module page. Sometimes you really just want to get the content type. Like, I don't want to have to go recreate all of these fields because I have the perfect blog content type set up over here, and I just want to bring that over. And you bring that over, and then you could maybe export views if you want, and that's a little bit less overhead than having to have features installed and then worrying about the features becoming out of date and all that sort of thing.
Makes sense.
It's a nice little utility to have available to you.
Yeah.
That's really what it comes down to. As opposed to retyping a content type definition, and you could simply copy it over.
I mean, that's also something like when you're working on something in development and you want to sync it up with a production site. That's another time saver there.
That's how I would use it. Yep.
Yeah.
All right.
So there you go.
21,000 installs, so it must be useful for somebody. All right,
Well,
Jason.
hopefully
21,000 times.
What's that?
I said Jason's installed it 21,000 times.
If I had actually completed that many websites, I think it would be time to retire.
Okay, so let's wrap up this show. Jason, where can people find you online?
You can find me at jpomentel on Twitter, around Instagram, pretty much everywhere else. And if you so happen to be in New Orleans next week, you could catch me at the CSS Dev Conference on Monday and Tuesday. So sadly, Wednesday is a travel day. I may be missing the show again.
Okay. Well, good luck. John, how about you?
You can find me on all the major social networks at John Picozzi, and always on at umvik.com.
Excellent. Nick?
And you can find me at Nixman pretty much everywhere, and 3 weeks from now at New England Area Drupal Camp in Providence, Rhode Island.
We just changed the title of it, the New England Area Drupal Camp.
New England Drupal Camp.
All right, nudecamp.com. Tickets are going, so anyone who's interested in attending should plan on not waiting to the last minute to buy a ticket, or you'll be sitting outside looking in. So.
And there was a new post up today about what the esteemed Mr. Jeff Robbins will be talking about in his keynote address. I think that's going to be really great. I have not heard him talk about this stuff in particular before, so I think it should be really, really cool.
I think it's a new concept he's been working on, so I think we're probably going to be getting the first version of it.
Awesome.
Also, if you're looking at the Nude Camp social media, there is a great animated GIF on there.
Hashtag save Nick. Register now so he gets a break. Go to Twitter and figure out what we're talking about.
Okay, guys, we'll speak next week. Take care.
All right. Take care, guys.
Have a good week.